Hi, Tammy. Welcome to the Leaders Lab.
Thanks, Ken. I am so happy to be here. I've been looking forward to this conversation. So thanks for having me.
Me too. I've done my homework, so I have gotten to know a little bit about your background, but I haven't heard it from you personally. So maybe you could walk us through that a little bit. Where'd you grow up? And maybe let that lead into kind of your early career if you could.
Yeah, sure. Cyber stalking only gets you so far, right? So you
Exactly.
want to go
Yeah.
straight to the source. So I grew up in a super small town in northern New Jersey, and there were more cows than people in terms of dairy farms. And so that's really where my roots were. And as I was growing up and about 15 years old, my parents split up. And so that wasn't uncommon. That was all the rage back then, and
Yeah.
everything was fine, except about a month later, my dad went missing in action, and my mom, my sister, and I were homeless.
Oh, wow.
And so we spent months couch surfing on friends and relatives. And, my mom got pregnant with me when she was in high school. And so she didn't graduate, and she always supported my father and his business. And so she was left completely ill-equipped to support two children and this catastrophe that really had hit her.
Wow.
And so at a very, very impressionable age at 15, I saw how much she struggled. And I saw how hard she worked, and I swore that that would never be me. And so, by the time I graduated high school, my grades sucked. I had no ambition, and my attitude was even worse. And so college was not an option for me because obviously we didn't have any money. And so I started working right out of high school. And that's really the foundation of how my journey through my corporate life and now through my entrepreneurial life had been shaped. And so it was a different way to come through the ranks, and
Can
that
I?
changed my perspective on things. Yeah, go
Yeah,
ahead.
I wanted to ask a couple of things there. So first of all, just based on the ages and time frame of your mom having kids, so she was only like 32 or something when this happened. Yeah.
Mhm.
So very young mom to have kids in high school, like that's crazy. And then you said you knew right away that, and it's funny, I share some of the same feelings, so don't let me press my own, version of your story. But I had the same thing where it was like, you know, sometimes you learn from bad examples as much as you do from good ones, sometimes even more, right? So it sounds like you said, okay, I'm definitely like being successful, making your own money probably became a core thing. Is that what led you to do poorly then in high school and that like I don't see the point of this because I can't make money in it right now? Or was it just that you were kind of
I was
goofing
just
off and
15
being
too
a kid?
early, right?
Yeah,
So
yeah. Okay.
I
Okay.
had all the answers, and I couldn't be bothered with any of it, right? So and my father was always very strict, and
Right.
my mother was not, and she had her own crap to deal with, right? So
Sure.
so I was able to kind of, run free for a few years with, without having that stern hand on the wheel. And so so I had the bad attitude because, I was just angry at the world, right?
Sure.
And, this wasn't supposed to happen. And this, no one else looked like that. And, trying to hide that from my, classmates in school and all of that stuff was just, it was really impressionable, especially at 15, right? Where you're just starting to figure out, who you might be as a human.
So what was that first job coming out of high school?
Yeah. So I'm going to count this into serendipity and pure luck, right? So
Sure.
my first job out of high school was working for a temporary staffing agency called Manpower.
Yep.
And
Familiar.
I worked on the light industrial desk. So I placed factory workers and warehouse workers and day laborers and stuff like that. So I would go out to all these plants and warehouses and put on my business suit and my little hard hat and like go walk the plants and make sure it was all safe. What did I know at 18 years old?
Right.
And I loved it, because we would both, do the interviewing on the candidate side. And then, and it was always, every morning it's like, okay, who didn't show up today? And then the mad scramble to backfill. But the unique opportunity here is, and I think this is something that I can point to several times in my career, is that I had a mentor that saw more in me than I did.
Mm-hmm.
And because, I was in survival mode at this point, right? I was just, I'm out, and I think my drive to be financially independent and successful probably was over amplified because of my experience, right? And so we overcompensated a bit. But I felt like I had nothing to lose because I didn't.
Right.
And so I had no fear because I didn't know any better. I was still too young. And the franchise owner that owned that, the South Philly, the Philly, South Jersey area that I was in, like he just let me run. And so if there was a new division that had to get started, he'd have me do it. Now, I had no idea what I was doing. All my peers were like 10, 15 years older than I was. But because I didn't know and I couldn't fool anyone into thinking that I knew, I always was curious and I wanted other people's opinions. And how do you think I should do this? And so that natural ability to collaborate through just a lack of my own personal ability
Yeah.
to say, this is the right way, really was shaped early in my career. And so Marty Klein, I'll never forget him. Like every time there was a problem, every time there was something new, it's like, Tammy, you want to do this? And I'm like, sure, let's do that. And so I was there for 9 years before I started to make a move. And that was really where a lot of the foundational grit and ability to fail successfully and learn how to take risks and collaborate, which is really the foundation of my leadership philosophy and how I lead. That's really where all that was formed.
Were you making pretty good money then, like during that time frame?
Compared to what I thought being a data entry operator was going to be good.
Yeah, yeah. You're like,
Right.
I'm crushing it,
Yeah,
you know?
so yes, and back then, not to date myself, but I was comfortable,
Yeah,
and as I was there, I was married and at the time, not at that time, but later, and my husband was a stay-at-home dad. And so, I was making enough to support a family, which was great, but it was early days. And so I was still learning, but I was making enough to where I didn't have to worry,
what
not enough to
about,
have a savings, but enough not to worry, paycheck to paycheck.
I hear you. And what
Yeah.
about the relationship with your parents? Did your dad ever come back into the picture? And how was the relationship with your mom as a young adult?
Yeah. And so, my dad, I had an epiphany on where he was about, and so I found him.
Okay,
And, there was back taxes, it was all kinds of drama. And so we had an on and off again relationship, since then, obviously, as you might imagine. And then the turning point for me was really when I was pregnant with my daughter, Emily, because I was like, you're going to either be all in or all out. Because I don't want her to be, I don't want her to go through this as well.
sure,
And you know how they say to write a letter, but just don't mail it? Yeah, well, I wrote a letter. It was 7 pages double-sided, and I mailed that baby, right?
sure.
And it took a long time for him to respond. And the opening line of the letter was, I've tried to write this 100 times. And it was incredibly well done because, if I could change everything, I would, but then you can't keep persecuting me for the things I can't change because we can't move forward. So it's a little bit of calling BS on me as well.
Hmm.
So long story short, we did reconcile.
Oh,
And,
cool.
and I just like, listen, that was the biggest mistake he's ever made. And I knew that he went to his grave regretting it. But yeah, we reconciled, which
That's great.
was good for me and, and my family. Right. So.
That's great. What about with mom?
Oh yeah, mom and I were
All
always
good?
tight. Yeah, we
Yeah.
never understood each other, but we always loved each other.
Okay, so back to your timeline. You are 9 years into Manpower. You're
Yeah.
making a move. You've got this great work experience now, probably a pretty impressive resume for, I'm guessing, a 27-year-old or so at the time. And so, but you don't have a college degree. You end up in these environments where that is just a foregone conclusion. How did you get in the door? I mean, was it from
Yeah.
your work experience? Was it from contacts from Manpower? Like, how did you make that pivot?
Yeah, so how I made the pivot, because when I went from Manpower, then I moved into, because I had started a technology division at Manpower
Okay,
when it was first getting started. So like we hedged. So we had like biotech, engineering, IT, because we did all, placements on all of those because we weren't sure really, it was brand new in the market. That's how far
sure.
back we're going. And so, so at that time, the technology, the IT piece of it was taking off because we are in, a year or two before Y2K,
Hmm.
right? The dot-com era is on fire, right? I mean, there are new companies being born every day and getting millions of dollars in funding, that kind of thing. And so it was a very mercenary environment. anybody who knew anything could name their price and do that. And
Sure.
so I clued into that really quickly, especially in the New York metro area. And so, we moved from, South Jersey back into New York metro, where I, basically moved around in a few of these professional services firms because whoever would pay me the most won.
Right.
And as we were helping companies and shepherding them through their startups and through making sure that the lights stayed on and everything still worked during Y2K. And while I was
So
in that market, I was mostly servicing Wall Street and the industries around that.
I'm smiling because it's just funny how our old like patterns like pick back up because you were like, I was going to the highest bidder basically, right? Whoever would pay me the most, because it just goes back to that thing that you felt at 15 where it's like, this isn't happening to me. And not saying that's your primary driver now, but
It
it
was
served
then.
you. Yeah. And it served you, right? Like it serves you for a period of time. And so that's amazing. Where does it go next?
Well, going back for just a second, the
Yeah.
very first move I made outside of Manpower, so I relocated the family. My husband at the time was a stay-at-home dad. My daughter was like maybe 2. And the guy who hired me and I still friends today.
Yeah.
And I'm there for about 6 months to run that office for sales recruiting and all that kind of fun stuff. And he quits because he gets a better job offer. And then his boss was just such an ass. And like he and I, like literally, I walked in one day, I had a cup of coffee in my hand, and I didn't even get a chance to put it down before he fired me.
Oh, wow.
Now, keep in mind, I had, there was no severance, right? I got 2 weeks notice. Medical benefits were shut off as soon as that ended. And I had zero connections in that market because I had been down south for so long. So after I spent 3 days literally crying on the couch, feeling sorry for myself, I'm like, okay, I am not feeding my family by crying on the couch. That's when it really occurred to me what was happening in the market. Because as soon as I started to put my feelers out there, I felt like a free agent.
Right.
And then that's when that whole, mercenary mindset kicked in where I'm like, oh, okay, this is actually the best thing that could have happened to me. But it taught me a strong lesson in that, no one's ever safe,
Right.
right? In terms of your corporate career. So you need to make sure that you've always got a plan B. And that you're always one phone call away from your next opportunity, whether it's by your decision or someone else's.
As you started reaching out to these tech companies, then was your role really to help them staff their teams or to replace founders, or like what was
I
your
was a
role
branch
specifically?
manager. So I
Okay.
would manage the sales team that was
Yeah.
out getting new clients. I would manage the recruiters that were finding and sourcing the staff. And then I'd also manage the delivery managers who were actually out in the field and had that level of expertise, that were on site. So I would manage the entire ecosystem of what we did, depending on what company it was with.
Very cool. And so
Yeah.
this goes on for how long before you end up at
Oh, this goes
AIG?
on probably for another 5 years or so,
Yeah.
right? And then after .com turned into .bomb,
Yeah.
right? After the world didn't end in Y2K, the industry started to suck. Like it got really commoditized. The whole concept of, adding value in anything was
Hmm.
just gone because they went through vendor management and all these suppliers, and it just stopped being fun.
Hmm.
And so I was out having drinks with one of my clients, one of my team's clients actually, just, shooting the shit. And I was like, this is just not any fun anymore. He's like, come work for me. And he was at Bank of America. And I was like, I've never been inside a financial services institution before. So I was like, okay. Because what I had done is what they needed. And here's one of the biggest things I want to talk to our listeners about, because we tend to think that what we do is unique to where we are, and it's
Right.
actually not.
Right.
And when you can figure out the things that come naturally to you and find an opportunity where it's in high demand and in short supply, you call the shots. And I'll tell you a story of exactly how this happened. And I did get in without a college degree because he knew he needed me.
Right.
Right. And he was willing to go to bat with HR and say, too bad she's got the experience. They didn't like it, but they did it anyway.
Right.
And so I had always run a consulting organization. That's how I grew up. So I knew how to use a small amount of people to serve a large amount of clients. That was all I knew. Now, at Bank of America at the time, and this was in the technology infrastructure space of all places, where I knew absolutely nothing,
Right.
about what, servers and all that. Like I knew nothing. But what I did know is how to run a centralized team
Right.
and service and make a lot of different stakeholders happy. And at the time, each different business unit, there were 6 of them, had their own infrastructure. And it was expensive and it was clunky. But yet, when you have a retail bank and an investment bank, they're special.
Right.
How can they possibly share anything because they're so different? So, out of 400,000 people within the organization, there were very few people who knew how to actually do this. And even more importantly, from a political perspective, it was a landmine. So no one wanted to step on the landmine.
Right.
Now, remember, I don't care because I'm already punching above my weight. So I've got nothing to lose. So my first job there was to reorganize a team of 5,000 people.
And
I'm
so
like,
you were essentially between your vision and his vision. It sounds like you were sort of the hub or the linchpin to what would then become more of a centralized
correct.
approach to this, correct? And so you had to do the whole hey buddy kind of leadership thing on one hand, right? The lead by influence, and at other times, uh, I guess more structural or operational in terms of actually building it out, right? The cost
Totally.
structure, the all of that, but yeah, how did that go? How did they take to a non-industry outsider, high school educated? How did you
No
jump through
one knew
those
I was high
hurdles?
school educated. That
Yeah,
was
you
well
didn't.
kept secret.
Okay,
It's incredibly well guarded. HR knew I never lied out an application,
sure,
but that was not something that was because I spent all my time trying to blend in and look like everybody else.
sure,
Right? Because that's how I thought I needed to be. And later on, we'll talk about it, but I found out in a very epic way why that wasn't the case. And I think because I had a natural ability to collaborate and because I was willing to take risks and because I had an outsider's perspective where things that were so common sense to me were like, oh, I never thought of it that way
mm-hmm.
because not because they couldn't, but just because they haven't had to.
Mm-hmm.
And so bringing these ideas in with a high degree of energy, plus I can hold my alcohol. So taking people out for drinks was always helpful because with a
Sure,
sales leadership background, you got to be able to drink. And so, being able to take that sales mindset, which I was still in from being in the industry for so long, and treating all of these different leaders as my customers instead of as my competition.
right,
Because there was so much fighting amongst each of them in terms of who was more important. And then when you show up and you're like, you're all important and you're all unique, and I have a way to make you all happy in your unique way and accomplish the centralization goals that we have, it wasn't without a lot of drama and a lot of conversations, but it got done.
sure. And I
And
think if they can realize that you're there with good intentions and that you're there ultimately to serve them, right? That their success equals your success, then it's like, and it sounds like what they had wasn't working all that well anyway,
it
right?
was
I mean,
working. It was
so
just really expensive.
yeah,
And the bank couldn't afford it anymore, right?
okay,
So that was the issue, was a cost play. And because I didn't have a political dog in the hunt, and I actually didn't know the subject. So I went on the frameworks that I had always used to create new businesses and to transform, in a larger, much larger scale, but in a way like you're the experts, I'm not, but here's the decisions we have to make.
right,
And then when they would answer them, I would, because I didn't know, so they knew that I was seeking to gain knowledge, not to judge, be like, tell me why that is.
right,
Because I need to understand, not because I thought you were an idiot. And so there is very little of coming across as a threat, at least earlier in my career, because I didn't know. And I was just there to help facilitate and bring this all together. But that's really where my large scale transformation experience came in. And that's ultimately, I was the COO. That was the role that I played in almost everything I did in corporate. But I was known as that transformation girl. So
yeah,
when the buildings were burning and everyone else was running out, my team and I were running in, and I loved it because I'm an adrenaline junkie, right?
yeah.
But that was really kind of how all of that started.
How long were you with Bank of America and where did it take you to?
Yeah, so I was with Bank of America for 6 years or so, give or take, and I loved it because in that time, in my entire financial services time, like I've had 11 different leadership roles. So I've led everything from sales to audit and everything in between. And because I had that chief operating officer skill set, because I'd been running businesses literally since I was 20 years old, because I didn't know any better, and because I had that transformation capability, there was always a need, and those skills were so transferable that whenever I was tired of one thing or got done with a big project, because I was not the lights on girl. Like if
Right.
you want somebody just to keep it running, I'll be bored out of my ever loving mind. And so I would always move whenever I was done because I wanted a new challenge.
Right.
So within the bank, I made a lot of moves because I got tired of the tech stuff and wanted to get back closer to the business. And, so, was able to make a lot of different maneuvers, and ultimately ended up in compliance, like regulatory compliance. I'm like, why am I here?
I was just gonna say that sounds like
I'm
the
like, I'm why
opposite
you
of
have it, right? I'm the
when
reason you have regulatory compliance. We had just bought Merrill Lynch, and it was during one of the financial crisis, and like all hell was breaking loose. And compliance, we'd never had really had to oversee international business before. We said we were an international bank, but we were not. And so being able to look over the Merrill side of the work and travel the world and make sure that we keep the regulators happy and that we're doing the right thing and all of those things, like I didn't know I was surrounded by lawyers. I was surrounded by like regulatory compliance people who actually went to Capitol Hill and got things done. You want to talk about feeling like you're in over your skis.
yeah.
I was like, why am I even here? And I remember there was this one time I had to go into a very senior leader's office. I was like 3 levels down. I'm like, why am I going? I probably just pulled the short straw. And I had to get him to do something in the EU that I knew he wasn't going to want to do. And so we're in his office, big office, and it turns into a screaming match because that's how we communicate. And the phone rings. And I know he did this on purpose. He put it on speaker. And as soon as the voice came through on the other end of the phone, my jaw dropped. Basically, the conversation went, "Hey dude, how'd I do last night?" It was John McCain the day after his first debate with Barack Obama.
Oh wow.
And they can proceed to bro out for about 20 minutes
While you're standing there.
while I'm sitting there listening to the whole conversation. And I'm like, now think of me, right? Small town girl, more cows than people, no college degree. I'm like, what am I doing here? So I try and not like look dumbstruck, which I clearly failed. He hung up. We continued the fight. I lost. I go to my boss's office. Now, at the time, there's all glass offices. So I'm pacing like a crazy person. And I'm sure they're ready to call security at some point, right? Because I'm like ranting in my hand. I'm like, why am I here? Like, I'm not this, I'm not that, all these things. I'm like, I don't belong here. And she was amazing. And so she let me go for a bit. And then she started laughing at me. And she's like, are you done yet? And I'm like, I guess so. She goes, sit down. She goes, you're here because you're not part of the problem. You're here because you think differently. You're not afraid to challenge. You're here because you are not like everyone else.
Mm-hmm.
Now, had I known that 10 years earlier, it would have been a lot easier because I spent so much time trying to be and act and look
Trying
like
to
everyone.
blend. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
not realizing that because I was different, because I came through the ranks differently, and because my perspectives and approach was different, that's actually why I was there. So I always thought it was my Achilles heel when it turns out it was my superpower.
Yeah, it was like your value proposition, but you were trying to gloss it over the whole time to be like,
Absolutely. It's a
oh, I'm
blend.
just like all of you suits in the room or
Totally.
whatever, right?
Yes.
I get that. I'm curious, and I think I might know the answer, but I want to ask you, is it like, so with that person that was talking to John McCain and maybe some of the other bosses that you had at Bank of America, did they encourage that kind of lively debate as long as when you guys kind of broke from the huddle and they made the call, you guys were running the same play? Do you know what I mean? Or
Not at
or
all.
or was it no? They didn't like it. So it was a
Um,
real fight, not just a
Yeah, no, it was real.
business argument. Yeah.
No, that's not at all how it worked. Now at
Okay.
Bank Leumi, that's how it worked, right? And I
Yeah.
love these really culture, forget about the politics, but no, because what would happen is you go into these big meetings, you'd come to an agreement, and as soon as you left, the ones who didn't agree were back channeling to undo everything that was done. So you'd have to go back and have these conversations 3 or 4 times.
Mm,
So yeah, no, I mean, yes, lively debate was encouraged because that's how people communicate in the Wall Street, in Wall Street. But in order, like, oh yeah, we all took a decision, let's do it. Oh God, no, it's so political.
right.
And it's so twisty, turny, and day to day. That no, that's not at all how it worked, unfortunately.
Did you just run out of cool stuff to do there, or did you get tired of kind of that
What happened
political
ultimately,
environment?
especially after the adrenaline rush, in
Hmm.
the financial crisis, I mean, I led a team that ended up with 3 international patents on data privacy, data security, and all these things that I knew nothing about because I can lead people who are way smarter than me, and I loved that. And so the role I took after that was a bit anticlimactic, and it occurred to me that, at the time the big saying was too big to fail.
Hmm.
And I'm like, this isn't just too big to fail, it's too big to fix. Like my team could execute perfectly on absolutely everything, and that stock price was never going to move.
Yeah.
And my team could screw everything up royally. And outside of getting fired, that stock price was still never going to move.
Right.
And so that's when I knew it was time for me to make a change.
Because it
And
was too hard to make an impact no matter how well you guys did.
correct, correct.
An ultimate impact. You can make an impact
Yeah.
on your, yeah.
I mean, I still have longstanding relationships and, we did some amazing work, that still stands today, believe it or not. But that's not, I lost my energy for that because I'm like, I could never finish a project.
Right.
And it became a game. It's like you would put all your cost savings to get funding into year 3 because you knew that the organization would never be standing the way it was. So you would never be held accountable.
Right.
So it's a good way to hedge, right? It's like, I need $5 million now. I'm going to give you 15 in 3 years. And 6 months later, there's a reorg, right? And
Right.
so you learned how to play that game. But ultimately, it was just not anything, I just lost the passion for it. So what I ended up doing is I took a chief operating officer role back in the tech staffing business. So I want to go back to my roots, and that lasted all of 10 minutes before I was like, oh my God, I remember why I hated this and got out. I was like, okay, so I did that for, a hot second and, just realized that, yeah, I think it's like when you, have you ever had the situation where, you dated someone and then you broke up and the years went by and like, you go out for drinks or something just to see like, is the spark still there? And you're like, yeah, no, it's not. Have
You're
you ever
like,
had that
what?
experience?
You're like, what happened? Well, I've been married for a bajillion years, but I've seen
Like you've
girls.
heard other people have that, right?
Well, I've seen girls from high school where you're
Yeah.
like,
Ooh,
whoa, yeah,
yeah.
father time has not been
Life
good.
happens. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
You know.
And so, it was just not a good fit for them or for me. And that's when I moved into what I think is probably one of my most favorite jobs I have had in my entire corporate career. And that was working for Bank Leumi. And they're an Israeli bank. They're one of the largest banks in Israel, and it was their New York location. And it was perfect timing because there was a new CEO that was in, he was a Wharton grad, well traveled, well educated, and very, very smart. The board had money because they wanted to finally invest in the US for a variety of reasons. And my boss was just phenomenal, and he knew not only how to hire all A players, but to get us not to kill each other.
Right.
And because we were transforming the bank. I mean, this is only going back maybe, I don't know, 10, 15 years, maybe not even 15. And I remember walking in. So I negotiated garden leave, so I had the summer off, and so I come in, my office is ready. And I remember walking the floor and seeing a typewriter. And I was like, oh, that's interesting. And then about an hour later, I heard someone use it. I was like, oh. I was like, okay, this is not what I expected. And every morning, FIS would come in with these giant reams of paper and put it on the loan operations and deposit operations desk, and they would do manual reconciliation.
Wow.
And this was like 10 years ago.
Wow.
And, e-banking, forget it, mobile banking, not even close. And so, I was on a team with, from the CEO down to transform this bank and to modernize this bank. And that was just so much fun. I mean, it was the right time, the right people, the right investment. And I think, just between the team and the culture and the pace and the impact was just amazing. So that was probably one of my favorite jobs in
Yeah, it's
adult.
almost like being in a startup, except you've got all the money in the world to do it,
Correct.
and it's in an industry that you just had some really good success with. So your level of confidence was probably really high.
Well, and again, I got brought in to run loan and deposit operations, which I knew nothing about.
Right.
But it was the only role they had open that they can get me in on.
Did you start getting very used to I remember kind of early in my career, if I was successful at something, and any good mentor will stretch you, right? They'll be
Oh yeah,
like, "Oh, you're good at this. You're not doing it anymore. Now you're
correct. Now you got
doing
to do, yeah.
this. Yeah, you're good at operations. We're putting you in sales. You're good at sales. We're putting you in production, like whatever." But I remember early on, it's a good muscle to flex early in your career because I think it's at the beginning, it's always a little scary getting a new challenge where you're unfamiliar. But after a while, you start betting not on your knowledge because you don't have any in the thing that you don't have knowledge in, but you start understanding yourself. Like, well, I'm going to figure it out. I've done this. You know, the first time you got to go figure out something new, very scary. The second time, a little less scary. The 10th time, you're like, I got this. If they put me here, it's because I can figure it out. Were you? I mean, and it sounds like you were at that point in your
Oh
career for
yeah,
sure, where it's
and
like
a
you
long
can't.
time before then too,
Yeah,
right? Because
exactly. Yeah.
the rate of change that I shifted was probably about every 18 months or so. I was
Yeah.
taking on something that I knew nothing about.
Yeah.
And what started as terrifying, turned into almost like required.
Yeah, like an
The minute I
expectation
felt
because you were like,
comfortable, I'm like,
exactly. Yeah.
time to change, and time to do something different.
I feel the same. I in corporate, I would get when you said you didn't want to be the lights on person, I can so resonate with that because it's a little boring, like run the playbook. Okay, I mean for a little bit, you know what I mean, just to make sure that what we've created works, but then for 20 years, like I just don't see myself as being that guy
Yeah.
either. Um so talk to me about the rest of that experience and then the transition over to AIG.
Yeah. So we were about two-thirds of the way through um, the um, the transformation that we were doing, and so things were bumpy, to say the least. But they were, we were modernizing, and the team was in place, and things were good. And I made a move for money, and it was the worst decision I ever made. And, so the boss that laughed at me in her office when I was losing my mind over, being outmatched in every way, called me and said, I need you over here. And she backed up the money truck to make that happen. So I was like, all right, I felt good that I left them. It wasn't done, but it was done enough. Right.
Right.
And it was, they were well on their way. And so I'm like, let's try this. And it was okay, but it
Right.
was just back to big corporate again.
Right.
And it was back to that same feeling that I had. And I was in audit this time. So that was even worse, right? In terms of like, okay. But again, it was transformation, all the things. And so I felt like this was just a different shade of lipstick on the same pig. And I'm like, ugh. So about a year in, I started to really feel like this is not my jam. And I knew it. And I remember being in a meeting. We had missed earnings again. And so the game we used to play, which was so much fun, is that, once we got completely hammered by the analysts, then we'd all get our pound of flesh and then we just blame each other for whose fault it was. Right?
Sure.
It's not me, it's them, it's not this, it's that. And that would just be fun. Then we go out for beers afterwards, it'll be fine. And I just remember like this was the moment that my corporate career really received its death sentence and I didn't even know it. So I kind of felt like I was in this out of body experience where I was hovering over the table, like you see in the movies, and just watching. And I developed this terminal disease called I don't give a shit-itis.
Sure.
And that was the beginning of the end.
Yeah.
And within 6 months, I had cashed out. I had moved to a tropical island off the coast of Belize in Central America and started this coaching company. And that was about 7 years ago.
Did you have the idea or sounds like it all kind of hit at once because like you said, you're in a meeting, everyththing's really on paper going better than
Oh,
fine.
are you
It's
kidding
going
me?
really
Managing
well.
director
Yeah.
title, big office, big job.
Yeah.
Outside, it looked like everybody thought, why are you giving up?
Yeah.
Like
So it's
when I
like
left.
huge money, but then you have this kind of lightning bolt and go,
Ugh.
what am I doing with my life? This isn't fun anymore. And at that point, it seems like you're also the kind of person who, when you flip on something, whatever it's going to be, you're kind of all in, right? I mean, you talked
Yes,
about
I'm
something
very
like,
much that lights
yeah,
on or off, right? So
yeah.
yes.
We're not going to stay here and waddle for 5 years in something I don't like to do, right? You're like, it's we either stay or
Oh,
we
Ken, I'm
go,
sorry,
but
I lost
yeah.
audio.
Oh, did you?
Let's see.
Oh, let me pause. Yeah, so we were talking about for you, it does seem like it's if you make a decision like that, you're not hanging out for 5 years to see if life changes. Like you're doing it one way or the other. You're either gonna stay and make it great, or try something new within it, or you're out. So when you made that decision to leave AIG and kind of leave corporate in general, did the idea of coaching immediately come on the back of that, or was it I'm just taking a break, I'll figure out what I want to do later?
I always knew that I wanted to do coaching and academic and board advisory work in what I would consider my soft retirement.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Because we age out on Wall Street. Let's not kid ourselves. And there
Sure.
is a point in time where you get sidelined, even at the highest levels, and you still want to be viable. So that was the extent of my business plan. I was
Right.
like, okay, that's it. And, the timing was absolutely perfect in that my daughter was graduating college. So she was off the payroll. My big fancy apartment, the lease was coming up for renewal. So I didn't have, that big nut to have to cover anymore. And then, my partner, he and I had been dating for a long time casually, and we decided we actually liked each other. So we were going to make a go of it.
Cool.
And so it just all kind of came together at the right time. And so I knew that I would do coaching of some sort. And as a career-long successful transformation executive, and like, I'm like, I got this.
Yeah.
And this was before anyone even knew what Zoom was.
Right.
Right. So when I'm telling people, they're like, how are you going to serve clients from a tropical island? I'm like, Zoom, like,
Yeah.
what's that? So this is way before we all realized, the virtual world that we can live in. And so that confidence, that experience, that battle tested, for 20 years did me zero good as an
Why?
entrepreneur. I made every mistake you could possibly imagine. It took me forever to figure things out, because I thought I knew it all. And as it turns out, leading 2,000 people in 36 countries is very different than being a solopreneur, having no product, no service, and, just starting from scratch. And so that false sense of confidence, I think, really cost me the first year and a half, right? In terms of it took me a long time to figure out. I built all kinds of things that I thought everybody would buy, but I also, because I saw what was needed in the market, and I was a transformation executive. So my first idea is, and people suck at that, right? So I'm like, I'm going to teach people how to be better transformational leaders because so many people stink at it. But I also said that I was not going to sell B2B. I was only going to go B2C because I was still addicted to the work.
Mm,
And if I went back B2B, I'd be back in the fire doing all the same things, just under my own flag.
sure.
But what I didn't realize or even think to even ask is, will people actually self-fund to be a better transformation leader? And the answer is no.
Yeah. By the way, no, you guys can't see me. I'm shaking my head no, because I mean, the, either way, you're back into B2B, because the individuals that can make that decision for themselves still need to get the approval of the corporation to spend the money, right? So they're coming back going, would it be okay
Well,
if I worked with Tammy, and will you pay for it? Right. So
well,
you're back into the
and
company. Yeah.
yes, and they didn't see it as a gating factor
Yeah.
to their success.
Right.
Right. So they don't see it as a problem to solve to begin with, let alone something that they would fork money out of their own pocket to do.
Because if you're self-grading on your transformational expertise, you're probably not seeing it clearly anyway, right?
No one knows that they're as
But
bad
the
as they,
but the
right?
corporation can see it,
Oh, totally.
right? They know who's good at that and who's bad. Okay,
That's
cool.
right.
So that drags you into working with companies.
Yeah, and so that failed miserably, right?
Yeah.
Because I had this great product that no one would buy. But ultimately what found me, and I think, as entrepreneurs, the one thing that I did have going for me is that I learned over the years how to fail successfully. Right. And so that always stayed with me as I went through my different revs and iterations. And I talk to all my clients, whether they're, business owners or leaders, is having that experimental mindset and not being so fixed on one direction, that you can't see the forest through the trees. And because when you have that experimental mindset, you get rid of the relationship between success and failure.
Right.
Like, so many people avoid failure,
Right.
yet you can't succeed without having failed.
Right.
So when you think about it, if you avoid failure, you are preventing success.
Right.
But how do you do this in a way that doesn't bankrupt your company or commit career suicide? And that's really where that, that experimental mindset comes in. And that's was my saving grace, is that I would do these revs. I wouldn't be like, oh, this is never going to work. I have to go. Because for me, it was very literally go big or go home. Like my idea of failure was having to go back to New York and make $500,000 again. Like
Right.
that was the worst possible outcome for me.
Right.
And, it sounds like a first world problem, which it totally is, but that was not something I ever wanted to have to go back to.
Sure.
And it was so easy to like that didn't work. I'm going back because I was always one phone call away from my next job. And so to have that resolve that chapter's closed
Right.
and that, yes, this hurts right now a lot, and the cycles, take longer. It's my own money and, all of that stuff. But getting through that was probably, was the hardest thing I've ever done. Um,
The let's talk about successful failure just for a second. I know we're
yeah.
running up on time, but what do you characterize as successful failures? Is it not staying in it too long? Is it not putting too much weight on it? Is it pulling out the nuggets that you can keep and at least now knowing what not to do? What are some of the characteristics for you?
Yeah, all of the above, right, Ken?
Mm-hmm.
So, I think the most important thing is knowing, keep the good stuff,
Yeah.
get rid of the bad stuff and try again
Yeah.
versus being defined by the bad stuff, right? Nothing is 100% success or failure ever in life.
Right.
So it's a narrative that you control. But also it's more of an art than a science to know when it's time to call it. Because in the beginning, I would call it too fast. I wouldn't give things a chance to run. Then I was holding on to things too long and, should have probably clipped it 3 months before I did. And so, that finesse and just going with your gut instinct and paying attention to how long does it usually take for whatever you're trying to do for you to make some good assessments. But it's also having a really good idea of what good looks like so you know where the goalposts are.
Right.
Right. So when you know that, you can say, am I heading in the right direction to travel? Or am I really stuck or moving backwards? And that helps also know when to call it and when not to.
When did you know you were really getting traction on, like, I found it? Was there, like, I mean, obviously it was a
Yeah.
slow build, but was there kind of a moment or a period of time where you were like, okay, like I have seen enough stuff, I have tried enough stuff and done enough stuff. I'm feeling good now about the direction. When did that happen for you?
That happened, and I can't remember exactly when, because the business that found me was mid to senior level executives that are stuck in the soul crushing grind and want to get out,
Right.
but they don't know how. They may not want to, move to a tropical island in Belize, but they are definitely done with what they're doing. But they think, I can't do it. I'm gonna have to take a step back. All the things that we were talking about as I was coming through the ranks. That's what found me.
Yeah.
And so I loved helping people see the possibilities. And I literally developed our signature program, which we've had about 500 people go through it so far in 2 days. And it
Whoa.
still stands today, where our clients are 95% of them are in a new role they've never done before, making 20% more in 5 months. I mean, it really does work. And so that was the light bulb moment for me. It's like, I didn't think I was doing this, but I actually love the look on people's faces when they see that there's alternatives.
Right.
And I think that the moment I realized that I didn't have to have that, that fear-based ambition anymore, was when a customer would say no, and I didn't go into an emotional tailspin.
Sure.
Right. Because for early days, if you bought from me, we were unstoppable. And if you said no, it's like I was never going to sell anything again. And so that, that up and down cycle, that smoothed itself out. Right. And then I moved my business model to a subscription-based model. And I did that about 18 months ago. And now the pressure is 100% off
And
because
now you
it's
can
such a
scale
game
it. You've
changer.
got recurring
Yep,
revenue and
exactly.
yeah.
Exactly. So I'm enjoying at first I enjoyed the coaching and I still love that, right? So I've got coaches on the team and I still coach individual clients. But where my energy comes from now is building the business,
Yeah.
right? Because I cashed out earlier, about 10 years earlier than I thought I would. And so now we're empire building, right? It's not a
Yeah.
commercially viable side hustle to make me feel, help me feel relevant. We've got a big impact to make. And the book talks, the book Escaping the Career Trap talks about everyone deserves to love Mondays again.
Sure.
And so when you think about everybody who hates Sunday nights, right, that's our target because it doesn't have to be that way.
Yeah, that's awesome. Do you, side note here? So I know you mentioned Belize. I thought I read that you guys are spending time in Mexico City now as well.
True story.
Uh,
So we lived in Belize for 5 years
okay.
and loved it. I say I went from Soho to Boho, right? It was tropical island life, flip-flops. It was great. But my partner and I are both big city people. And so about 2 years ago, we went country shopping. And so we explored a lot of different places that we might want to live. And I think as soon as we got our feet into Mexico City, we're like, this is home. So we've been in Mexico City for about a year and a half now.
Awesome. In like 2 months, my wife and I are going there for the first time. We're staying
Oh,
in Condesa, that
yeah,
neighborhood.
that's the
Yeah.
first neighborhood we lived in. We are definitely going out for dinner and drinks while you're here.
Awesome. I
Uh,
will, I'll message you. Like
oh, please do.
our son and his wife went there and just loved it. And we literally got the same Airbnb they were at like pre-COVID and stuff like that because everything just looks so great. So
It's
we're excited.
amazing. It is, the food culture here, the arts, just all of the things, the music here is great, is so good. And I think, but I was like, what do you like most about Mexico City? And the reality is the thing I love most about it is the people.
Yeah,
The culture here, they're not stressed. They look at you in the morning and say good morning. This is a big city of 22 million people where you're not supposed to talk to strangers,
sure.
and the energy and the vibe and just the joy and happiness that, I mean, everybody has a bad day, not everyone, has an easy life, but there's this sense of calm and happiness here,
Super cool.
that I'm hard pressed to find any place in the United States, especially right now.
That's super cool. So as we wrap up, and we'll put, of course, all your contact info in our show notes. Thanks for being on. It's been awesome. Your journey's been super cool, and yeah, I love the path. I love the continually breaking through new challenges, but then through all of that, I think like really figuring out the ultimate path of fulfillment for yourself, which sounds like it's really contributing and helping others, right? To do
Yeah.
better.
A good quarterly earnings report has never had pales in comparison to
Totally.
random texts that I'll get from a client, walking his dog, hiking his with the dog on a Wednesday afternoon, saying this would have never been possible without our working together.
Yeah.
Like there's no better rush than that.
No, I talk to leaders, guys that I've worked with before, guys
Yeah.
and girls, and the stuff that is so important in the middle of those quarterly earnings, of 25 basis points, blah blah. It's all just later, just garbage. But the person that you mentored or helped, or oh my God, I was talking with someone the other day, a client who she works for a vice president, senior vice president in their organization that I recruited while he was a senior at Vanderbilt. So I got to tell the
Wow.
story of he was literally a college senior, when I met him.
Yeah.
And I'm like, we did lots of things in business together. The only thing I really remember with clarity is that dinner at Vanderbilt. You know what I mean? I don't remember any of the profit margin stuff. Who
None.
cares?
That's it. Yes.
So very cool. And so how do folks work with you? They find you online,
Yep.
LinkedIn. Yep.
So, what I'd love to ask all of our listeners is to reach out on LinkedIn and connect and let me know you listened to this episode and give me an idea of what you thought about it, good, bad,
Cool.
or otherwise. But then also careerwinnercircle.com is the best place to go to figure out how to work with us, whether you're looking for a career change, leadership, coaching, or to get your business to the next level. And then I also do a lot of speaking engagements and keynotes and things. So
Cool.
you can go to tammyalvarez.com to see all of the good stuff about my speaking engagements and the topics that I talk about and things like that as well. But
Awesome. And guys, if you didn't get time to write that down or you're in your car, we'll put it in the show notes. Tammy, thanks again. And I'll look you up before we get down
oh
to
my
Mexico
goodness,
City.
yes, we're definitely seeing each other when you get here. That's for sure.
Sounds good. Tammy, thank you so much.
Such a pleasure.
Bye
Thanks.
bye.